From Sherard's classic account of working conditions in the north of England in 1897. The certainty of a shortened life, the possibility of a sudden and terrible death, and constant risks of painful accidents are well known to all the chemical workers in these alkali factories, and are accepted by them with an indifference which might seem callous were it not so apparently heroic. The men joke about their condition. I asked one man, whom I met in one of the factories, what they were manufacturing there. "Skeletons," he said, "and I, you see, am only half done."
In the years since 1980, when we had the first piece of anti-trade union legislation, is a gradual step backwards. We have now shifted from trade union rights being violated to human rights being violated.
I can think of no other country that has introduced the harsh labour laws that has been introduced in this country, where the government has been so hostile.
As we see politicians perhaps claim a return to Victorian values, then we see too some of the social conditions around and the employment conditions around which gave birth to trade unionism in the first place.
We saw the job in the Sheffield Star. We rang up and it was for 6 months full-time work, excellent accommodation and excellent wages.
I haven't experienced much about trade union because we haven't been taught in schools what it's about or anything.
There's 9 people to a room and there's no heating and nothing. Mostly we've come from night shift with our clothes into bed. Without, and I was like, was that cold?
I've no real experience with trade unions because I'm only 17.
We worked in a factory bagging veg and that.
I know 20 years ago or so they were very popular, but now you don't really hear that much about them.
The fellow who was working for, he was a contractor. He supplied the labour for local farmers and the factories.
All I know is that they're an organisation to take care of your needs, but I don't think I'll be a big part of them, no.
They had left a note on the door saying that all night shift have to work day shift. 6 in the morning till 12, so we ended up not sleeping that night.
Like unions are very important because they represent your rights.
And then when we all got together and looked at each other's wage slip, we were just flabbergasted. We just couldn't believe what we'd received. It was just unbelievable. I mean, between us, I think it was, £20 just over between us, really, so...
Everybody wants to fight for their own rights and get what they think is due to them,
So when we queried the wages, they turned nasty and threatened us, said that, that they were going to get a heavy mob onto us.
A trade union will look after you and make sure you won't get no harassment.
Well, I didn't get no money for 2 weeks' work, so they'll know that we'll leave, and then new people's always arriving, so he's always getting work done for now.
They try and bring people out on strike if all goes wrong. That's what I think they do.
We were never told about a union or anything like that, because we didn't think we would need anything like that. But I think now, yeah, I mean, I wish we had had a union to back us up.
This bloke at the bus stop, right, and this yuppie couple come up, right? Yeah. Now the car's broken down, right? Yeah. And she's pregnant, right? As soon as they get to the bus stop, wait 3 seconds and then they're off. Hey, where's the bus? Yeah, oh, they're all on strike, yeah, bloody union, yeah, right, in they go. And he says, hey, do you get maternity benefit? She says, oh, yeah. He says, and you, do you get paternity leave? Oh, yeah. Do you get holidays together? Oh, yeah. Get wage increase, pay for the kids, very expensive. Oh, yeah. Health and safety at work? Oh, yeah. Sickness benefit? Yeah. Well, where do you think they get all those things from?
The unions?
Yeah.
trade unionism has got very deep roots in this country, and our idea when Ruth and I first started to get interested in books was that if we didn't know something about the past, then we'd never find a way forward into the future. Social progress has only been made from knowledge and not from ignorance.
The trouble is that when we started, we thought that the subject would be covered by a few books and perhaps a shelf full of biographies. But we found that it covered a vast field of working class history.
It's very well documented. The social conditions during the early years of the Industrial Revolution are beyond belief.
There were no modern labour laws on the amount of time people worked or the conditions in which they worked. And it was only by combining in the unions that they were able to effect any change in their conditions at all.
The social reformer Annie Besant was the inspiration behind the Match Girls strike of 1888. In an open letter to the Bryant and May shareholders, she said, "Dear Sirs, do you know that the women and girls whose hard labour may do 22.5% dividend eat their food in the same rooms in which they work, so that the fumes of the phosphorus mix with their poor meal? And they eat disease as seasoning to their bread. Yes, disease, I say, for the phossy jaw which they talk about means caries of the jaw, and this works on the porous phosphorus as they chew their food and rots away the bone. Oh yes, your foremen have sharp eyes, for when they see one of the girls' faces swell up, they know the sign. She is discharged immediately and given no pay at all during her absence. Who cares if they die or go on the streets? Provided only that the Bryant and May shareholders get their 23% and Mr. Theodore Bryant can erect statues and buy parks."
The more that Ruth and I have read of history, the more we've been convinced of its relevance, not to the past only, but to the present and the future.
This is the 125th anniversary year of the TUC. And we've been celebrating the fact that after 125 years representing workers in Britain, we're still around. And contrary to what perhaps many people would think, we're still around and still fighting on behalf of working people. And if you look at the agenda of the first TUC, it's alarmingly topical.
Mr. George Potter, speaking at the first Trades Union Congress in 1868. "We must not close our eyes to the fact that it is believed by many that trade unions are declining. This assertion is made both by the press and by capitalists. At the present time, there are more powerful organizations amongst the capitalists and employers than there used to be. Unless we devise some system whereby the trade unions might be improved, the hold which they have on the country will decrease and their influence deteriorate. The importance of trade unions is shown by the opposition which has been brought to bear against them, and the determination manifested in certain quarters to put them down."
The first thing they discussed was the case for unions. Are unions necessary? The second thing they discussed was the insecurity of working life in Victorian Britain. They were also concerned about the way the labour law of the day was biased in favour of employers, and that unions had very little opportunity to act with any freedom on behalf of workers. And they were concerned about things that we're concerned about today.
Mr. A.W. Bailey, speaking to the first Trade Union Congress in Manchester. "A bargain implies two parties, a buyer and a seller. One party, called capitalists, are the buyer. Working men are the seller. The capitalist is rich, the labourer poor. The capitalist powerful, the labourer as an individual powerless. In these positions, the parties come together to bargain. An individual working man cannot drive a just and equitable bargain with the capitalist under such circumstances. The power of combination is only just sufficient to counteract the power which the capitalist possesses. The capitalist who employs 1,000 men who are combined is on the same footing as they. But if the men are isolated, then he is 1,000 times stronger.
I can assure you, in my wildest dreams, I never thought I'd be on a picket line. I honestly didn't. I mean, I was 35 years here. You know, in my wildest dreams, I never thought I'd be, you know, and I'm certainly not a communist militant or anything like that. I'm just an ordinary worker here, just a machinist, as I say, who came out on a one-day token strike, and we were all sacked. And there's no communist militants. I said, most of these here are long-serving people, been here since apprentices. We knew times were hard. We were reading that British Aerospace are laying people off, Rolls-Royce, who we do work for. And we said, yes, we accept a wage cut. But that only lasted a few weeks before this new contract came out. And we had our money cut by 20%. And then after that, we were told we're going to have a wage cut of 35%, up to 38%. All sick pay is going to be stopped. 1 week's holidays cut. No tea breaks, and if there was overtime, it's going to be compulsory and at flat rate. We had a secret ballot. Everything was done above board, which you've got to do now. Everything was done properly. We get the sack. And the law says we can be sacked. We're going back to the 30s. And my father told me it was like this, and you know, everyone's fighting for just for the jobs that are going about, and I think the firms are taking advantage of this, you know, and you know, everyone's scared of their jobs now. But there comes a time when you've got to say, you know, enough's enough.
Sarah Wesker was an official of the Ladies' Tailors Union in the 1920s. A lot of strikes would happen in the slack time when the bosses were trying to cut wages by 5 or 10%. Then you had to stand between the workers and the employers and say, there'll be no cuts. The first strike I remember was at a firm where the employer was so bad, he wouldn't even let me go out of the shop to get a doctor for a girl who was having a fit. When we were working on dark material, he would turn out the light to save electricity. And when I said I couldn't see, he'd answer, take your eyes out and wash them. I used to stand outside the factory and collect the girls' contributions. He would call me all the names under the sun and call the police to me. But the policeman would say, she isn't doing any wrong. But it was difficult. And eventually the girls decided they didn't want to be in the union anymore. After the strike, he wouldn't take me back, or my sisters.
When we Conservatives said, this is the way, they said, forget it. We were told you can't reform trade union leaders. You can't reform trade unions. Their leaders won't let you. But we did.
And what are we left with? We're left with 4 million unemployed. We're left with people frightened of their jobs and their job security, and social services devastated.
Yeah, she basically said to us, you're wrong. Your problem isn't that you've got rights. You've got too many rights. Your problem isn't power. You've got too much power. Give me your power, give me your rights, and I'll deliver utopia. We were mugged.
What we saw in the first few years of the Thatcher years, the period between 1979 and 1983, was the worst recession that we'd seen since the 1930s. I can remember the journey I made from Sheffield to Rotherham. What I remembered as a world of thriving, big, dirty, but busy, bustling factories was then all closed, all quiet. Now, they were all trade union members. The steel in the Don Valley was a strongly organised area. And the jobs that did develop in the 1980s in financial services, in leisure, in hotels and catering, in retailing, by and large were not traditionally associated in the same way with trade union organisation.
For style, sophistication and relaxed elegance, indulge yourself in Meadowhall's Park Lane. The most extensive range of designer labels in the north, including Monsoon, Austin Reed, French Dressing and Liberties. Stunning creations from Europe's leading design houses as Park Lane unveils this year's autumn and winter range.
Well, Sheffield is a fantastic place for shops, but it hasn't got the facilities to earn money to go and spend at them shops. There must be thousands of people that cannot shop at Meadowhall because there's no steel firms left, hardly, is there? I was real upset when I got made redundant. But jobs like that, I know, they're never going to appear again. You had to work hard. It was real, like you earned every penny you was there. But as long as I were getting the pay, and in them days, the real good mates you had, whereas nowadays, they're not so good. They seem to want to look after themselves. You know, there's not that comradeship as there used to be. You went to work and you felt as if you was needed at work. You know, there was no threatening you with the sack if you did slightest thing wrong. Whereas nowadays, you've got to be real careful because you can get sacked for the slightest thing now.
It is a big change for a lot of people. We have a fair number of people that have worked in very heavy industrial backgrounds, mining backgrounds, steelworking backgrounds. I think they're very used to being ruled rather than being asked to work to a particular standard, and understanding why they have to work to that standard. That's probably the biggest change that they have to make. We hopefully guide them along by very intensive training courses, both on the job and induction, in terms of making them feel good in themselves and giving them confidence back in themselves.
When I was on nights at Meadowhall, we did try to organise joining the union, but we was put off it by, we heard on the grapevine that anybody what joined the union was going to be sacked, kind of thing. So you can imagine, you know, a lot of people have been out to work and they just kind of got this job kind of thing. They got their feet on the table kind of thing. They didn't want to know about being sacked or everything. So it all went quiet.
I'd be very surprised if the staff felt the need for trade unions here. The way we do things, the benefits that we provide, and the rates of pay for staff. I don't feel that there would be a need for a trade union involvement. The environment already exists for open and positive discussion.
There's a great mood of insecurity about, and there's a great mood of fear about. One of the things that particularly concerns the TUC at the moment is the way that high unemployment is not just affecting the unemployed, though that's serious enough, but the way it's feeding through into the world of work.
There was recently an advertisement in the overseas press placed by the Department of Trade and Industry inviting foreign companies to invest and set up in this country, and that the big attraction was low pay and perhaps an absence of trade unionism. They seem to take pride in the fact that our real pay levels are lower than those of most of Western Europe, and that our social security benefits and the fringe benefits in industry are also lower. Our laws make it much easier for people to be dismissed than do most West European countries. So it seems to me a cause for shame rather than pride, and I would have thought the future must rest on a more highly skilled labour force.
Frankly, we're all vulnerable, but some of us are just more vulnerable than others. The weakest end, so to speak, are women, for example, black people, young people, women has now faced a situation where there is no longer any protection. Through the Wages Council, 2.5 million people who were covered are now without protection. Open to low pay and exploitation. And of course, there is no such thing as pensions, there's no such thing as proper provisions for sickness or those with caring responsibility. So we are going backwards as a nation in terms of how we treat our people in the workplace, and that's sad.
From a Transport and General Workers Union survey of 1993. Near to the high unemployment towns of Dundee, Perth and Fife, gangs of casual workers are hired every year to harvest the raspberry crops. Many of the pickers are mothers and their children, so desperate to earn a bob or two they dare not complain about the pay, the hours, or the dangers. Mothers have no choice but to bring their toddlers into the same fields as tractors, trailers, and other dangerous machinery because they can't afford the luxury of childcare. One strawberry grower boasted of paying children just 15p for planting 20 plants. It wasn't exploitation, he claimed, but education and work experience.
Mushrooms, we were dismissed from our jobs last November for refusing what amounted to was a pay cut. We refused new terms and conditions. The company told ACAS that they would issue statutory notice and implement the new contracts, but they never. They came in one Friday morning and dismissed 89 pickers from the Witterbridge farm. Now, the company looked on us as a bunch of women that were there to earn pin money. This just wasn't so. To many households, this was the only income.
They expected us to work that much overtime. They just thought that we could only work for the company. We didn't have to work at home. We didn't have families to keep. And it was totally unfair. There was girls working 50 hours a week for them. The girls really bent over backwards for them, but they didn't consider that the girls had a private life.
I think multinational companies are unaware that women are growing in strength. We've become more aware of what's going on around us, and we're not prepared to sit back, and we weren't prepared to go home and cry into our coffee.
Because they did fail to see just how strong we women could be. We didn't sit and weep and whine. We organised the picket line. And to the
Booker PLC are the parent company that own Middlebrook Mushrooms. Today is a big day in Booker's calendar, and we're here to protest our innocence, if you like, outside the Booker presentation at the Guildhall in London.
Booker Prize is such a sham. The company doesn't give a damn. Workers rising does attack. If they insist, they get the sack. You vote us now, we did reject. To minority, we did elect. We stood our ground until we found. Just to the dog till we were bound. And to the picket we all go, through wind and rain and hail and snow. We'll have our tears, we'll have our fun, but we won't wait till we have won.
Many employers, and certainly government, have regarded unions either as things of the past, perhaps at best irrelevant, and at worst, and I think in Mrs. Thatcher's phrase, the enemy within. I don't think this approach is conducive to good employee relations or to the future success of British industry.
Over this way, girls.
Karen, have you got loads of stickers on you?
You know, an insecure society, I think, is based upon an insecure work. If you're not steady at work, if you haven't got a steady job, then you haven't got a steady lifestyle. And many of the social problems that have been debated so vigorously in Britain today, I think, are related to what's happening in the labour market.
Internal building.
We've got copies of all the letters, and we'll hand them out at the meeting on Friday morning.
No, this is Roddy Doyle. He's one of the shortlisted authors. He's come to say a few words to you.
And the support from the Writers Guild has been unbelievable.
Roddy, I understand you're expressing sympathy with the women mushroom pickers from Salvage.
Yes, I am. Their union notified me about what has been going on, and from what I know, I support them fully in what they're doing. I admire their courage, and I hope very much that they get what they want and that they win.
We know we're just the ordinary working class and they're the money folk. We've got to make them realise that they should think about other people. They shouldn't do to us what they're doing.
So do you have any message for Booker this evening?
Yes, give the women back their jobs.
You've already lost your fight. No, we haven't lost our fight. No way. We're going to fight them until the bitter end.
As long as there is exploitation, as long as there is oppression, as long as there are bad employers, trade unions will always be needed. And frankly, trade unions are needed now more than ever. If they didn't exist, we would go out and invent them.
From A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose, said Scrooge. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, said Scrooge, and it's not fair. If I was to stop you half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet, said Scrooge, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning the greatcoat to his chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
The programme